Hello, welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for social justice and collective liberation. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Damien. Thank you so much for joining us today.
For those new to our podcast, Interdependent Study is meant to be a space and community for folks who believe in and want to do the work for social justice.
Each week, we bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Damien, you're up this week. So what are you bringing to the table today?
I am up this week. Well, first of all, it was so good to hear that intro music. It's been a minute. We've been away for a little bit. And I
Wait, have we been?
We've been away.
Okay.
I know the people have missed us. Should we share a little bit about why we were away?
Sure. Yeah, I had I welcomed a new child to my family.
Yes.
And so, newborns and finding time to record podcast don't always mix.
Not at all.
Yeah. So we had to take a few weeks off just to, I could be awake enough to sit here and talk into a microphone and be intelligent enough to string together some sentences, which
Absolutely.
I already feel that I'm struggling with. So, we'll see how this goes. Bear with me.
I said we're going to do the best we can today.
Sure are.
But yeah, you were doing exactly what you needed to do, being a great dad, the great dad that you are. So
thank you.
I'm excited for you. You already know I'm in love with him too.
Yeah.
So
Great.
Well, we're thrilled to be back. And for today's episode, I have brought a couple of pieces to the table for us about homelessness. So the first piece is called Homeless Sweeps Increase Mortality Rates of Unhoused People, Research Finds, which was published in Truthout last month and was written by Zane McNeill, who has written a lot for them and also for In These Times, who we love around here.
Yeah.
Also written for Waging Nonviolence and The Progressive. McNeill's piece is all about this violent act of sweeping of unhoused people by the police in states really across the country and the impact that this sweeping has in the short and long term for unhoused people and really beyond those folks as well. The other resource I've brought to the table is from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, called Homelessness and Racial Disparities, which really offered some great data and insight and context about the current issues and trends related to homelessness in this country. So I'm really excited for this conversation, and we get to talk about and really amplify the issues of these homeless sweeps because it's a really violent and traumatizing action on a really vulnerable population of people, and I think folks should know that this is happening.
Yep.
So let's get into it. Where do you want to start? What did you think of these pieces?
Yeah, I think that both of these articles point to so many of the ways that our systems fail people consistently.
Yeah.
And I know I said this toward the end of our last episode, if you can remember that far back. Our systems routinely are failing people. Systems are creating an issue by the very nature of them existing, and then exacerbating that issue through the response, right? So homelessness exists because the system allows for homelessness to exist, and then we exacerbate that by house people being uncomfortable and raising a stink about it with local government, who then do these sweeps and violently displace people.
Right.
So the way our economy works specifically creates these conditions where lots of people don't get what they need. It's baked into the system, and you combine that with the legacies of white supremacy, and you get this awful response to a problem that is endemic to the capitalist economy we've adopted here in the U.S. So where instead we could respond to this issue with care and compassion and bringing what people need to a situation, cities remove people from their encampments and mostly tell them to figure out where else to go without any kind of support or assistance, or that support or assistance is incomplete. It doesn't follow through on what they kind of actually need.
Yeah, you didn't miss a beat.
Yeah,
that was
brilliant.
I mean, those are such great points, I think, right? It's a really great synopsis, I think, of what's at the core of the issue of homelessness here in this country, right? There are, as you say, so many systems that are failing really all of us, right? And we've talked about that here before, but especially the most vulnerable of us, like unhoused people. And so I think this is really good. That's really good context to keep at the sort of forefront of all of this, right? In this conversation that we're going to have. So I appreciate that insight. I think so much of that is actually linked to some of the research that is in the piece by the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They've done an incredible amount of research and work to understand and report on racial disparities among the unhoused and amongst a lot of other things. So they've done that research. They've also done work to understand the conditions that contribute to those disparities, right? So in their piece, they pointed out how African Americans account for 37% of people experiencing homelessness and more than 49% of homeless families with children. And how there's also a stark disparity among Indigenous and Latinx people who are unhoused as compared to white people who are unhoused, right? And how the conditions that exist in our society help account for how and why Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people are experiencing homelessness at a higher rate, right? So these are conditions such as poverty and extreme poverty, really, right? Incarceration rates, housing discrimination, limited access to high quality healthcare and food and services for support, right? So these are all issues and conditions that play such a huge role in this and have to be addressed, I think, alongside the work needed to help curtail homelessness in general, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so much of this it's all interconnected. And so there's so many ways that, there's so many things to address that it would be great if we started from, a place of actually addressing the issue instead of the things that we sort of collectively choose to do. So one of the things that stuck out to me in the Truthout article was this connection between homelessness and addiction. And the article said more than 30% of people who are experiencing homelessness also have a substance use disorder.
Wow.
And these sweeps of homeless camps, as the article mentioned, ends up destroying life-saving medication like Narcan, which means these sweeps lead to more overdoses and deaths. And it also removes a network of people who might be there to save someone from dying of an overdose because they're no longer in the camp that they were in.
Where they've built some community, right, and have folks that know their situation, right?
And so instead of funding programs to respond to homelessness with care, right, again, it's theme, cities are spending money on police sweeps and removal of people and removal of these camps. And so, the bottom line, these choices that cities are making lead to more deaths. So cities are spending money to kill people. It's indirect, but that's what's happening is you do these sweeps and people lose their network, they lose their community, they potentially lose this life-saving medication. And
what's left?
What's left? Yeah.
Absolutely. What is the other outcome?
Yeah. And I don't remember the article getting into this or not, but one of the things that I think about too is that connection between homelessness and substance use is how much of that is also self-medication of like, how do I get through whatever situation that I might be in?
Right.
And that's, it's just another factor of it all to sort of think about as we consider what are the conditions that people are working through and living through. And then how are we making it worse by kicking them out of the place where they've sort of found a way to settle and have some stability.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to say that piece around, how many folks are in that situation because they're trying to escape in some way the conditions in which they find themselves. Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that bottom line. It's so true. It's a decision that, our leaders, our governments are making, right? And our police departments are making. And the outcome is, more deaths than anything, right? More harm than anything. So I appreciate that. The Truthout piece was great. One of the things that stood out to me from it, and the reason why I wanted to bring this to the table is the notion of these sweeps, right? These homeless sweeps, and just how dangerous they are, right? So the piece opens up by citing research from the Journal of the American Medical Association that found that homeless sweeps have the potential to increase deaths of unhoused people by 25% by the year 2028, right? And so that's not that far away from now, really, when you think about it, as we know how time goes around here.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like that jump, that leap, that increase in deaths to me is just sort of unconscionable to think about, right?
Yep.
And so later in the piece, Zane McNeill sort of elaborated on the other ways these sweeps are so dangerous. So he says, quote, homeless sweeps also threaten unhoused people's health, well-being, and connections to care, compromise personal safety and civic trust, and undermine paths to housing and financial stability, according to the National Health Care for the Homeless Council. During encampment sweeps, police often seize, damage, or destroy items needed for survival, such as tents.
Right.
These sweeps and the displacement that follows are traumatizing for people who are unsheltered, often exacerbating already existing mental conditions and pushing residents into more dangerous, isolated environments. Police also frequently destroy life-saving medications, as you pointed out, and medical equipment, right? Such as the overdose drug Narcan, effectively contributing to overdose death. Right. So that's the end of the quote there. And so, these sweeps, as you talked about, are also just, and not only just a physical danger to unhoused people, they are a compounding danger to them as well. Right.
Yeah. I mean, because you have difficult situation and then you make it worse. So all of that stuff compounds.
Yeah.
And in so many ways, shelters or stuff, the sort of stopgap measures that cities are employing don't meet the needs of people.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, one other thing the Truthout article pointed out was it's not just that these sweeps are happening, but that homelessness is criminalized. Camping out in public is a crime in many places across the country. And you connect that to something in the End Homelessness report, which says, quote, a criminal history can keep people from successfully passing background checks to secure both housing and employment.
Oh my goodness.
End quote. So this is the creation of a vicious cycle of criminalizing homelessness and then excluding people who have so-called criminal backgrounds from housing and employment because they were homeless and had to camp in public or do whatever else it was that they needed to do to, make it through, survive.
Yeah.
And then they end up with a record, and that record makes it difficult to do anything else from there. So it's, the article pointed out the sort of cycle that this creates too.
Yeah. And it's really sort of painful to think about that, right? Because if there's no investment in, right, or decision made by, again, our leaders to really do something different, right, then folks will always be in this vicious cycle, right? And it's just this cycle of harm, right, and torture. And really will, I think, have very limited ability to break that cycle, right, to get out of it, right, without some kind of intervention or support from somewhere, someone else, right? And so that to me is just the most troubling piece of this, that if we're not willing to do something different, right, we won't see a different result, right? So that's awful. Yeah, that Truthout piece really spoke to a lot of the issues surrounding this. So if folks haven't checked it out, I would encourage them to do so. Well, let's shift here, right? I think we're kind of getting into this, right? We it's been a while, but we talk about application, right? How might we apply what we've talked about today and read in these pieces to our daily lives? I'm really drawn to this idea of bringing light to the fact that these homeless sweeps are happening, right? Which is obviously why I wanted to bring these pieces to the podcast. You brought up how our systems often create or exacerbate the conditions that lead folks to homelessness, right? And keep them unhoused, right? This cycle. And I think these sweeps are just an added insult to injury, right? And, as we've kind of just talked about, right, they have such a negative impact on people's lives. And so I think all of us can I think the more all of us can learn about what's happening about these sweeps and actively engage in and with the resources from organizations like the National Alliance to End Homelessness or the National Homelessness Law Center, right? The more we can do, I think, to advocate for and vote for solutions and leaders who are interested in these solutions, that can call for the end of these sweeps, but hopefully one day work to just break these systems completely.
Yeah. That's good. My application for this week is to understand how much of our own lives are tied into these same kind of issues. I think homelessness is maybe one of the most visceral ways to understand how our systems fail us, because the reality is so many of us are very close to homelessness.
Oh my goodness.
So many of us are only a financial crisis away from being removed from our homes, whether we rent or own.
Yes.
And changing the way we treat homeless people changes the way that these systems treat most of us. So while we can sit here and say we're not homeless, so programs that support homeless people, we don't need to think about that. But ultimately, those will positively impact our own experiences living in our communities.
Yes.
The ways that our systems think about who we are and what our needs are, sort of more collectively.
Yeah, the way in which our neighbors and our loved ones and just, our community members are taken care of, right? Like that is important. We talked about being a financial crisis away from it, right? Like so many people, I'm sure lots of people listening, I personally, living paycheck to paycheck, right? Like that is an experience that many of us have, right? And so it is not unreasonable to think about how close all of us could be, maybe have been in the past, to homelessness. So it's important to think about. I love your application. Very good.
Thank you.
All right. Well, so now we talk about homework, right? What do we want to do when we leave this table today? I think I'm really sort of inspired by these pieces in our conversation. I'm really glad in particular that I found that resource from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They are I should have maybe spoke about this earlier. They're a nonpartisan and nonprofit organization working to end homelessness in the United States. And they do that by conducting research, sharing data, engaging in advocacy work at the local and federal levels, really to try to influence policy and implement resources to support solutions to ultimately end homelessness, right? And when I was on their website, again, this was a little bit ago, I know they've got some really incredible resources on it, right? From stats and publications to policy recommendations to resources on how to engage with our elected officials, right? To even online courses even, right? And so I would love to check some of that out and just learn more about all the great work that they do and figure out maybe what more I can do as it relates to this. So that's what I'm looking forward to. How about you?
Yeah. So I read an article several years ago now, but it was in Mother Jones magazine, and it was written about a program in Utah where they decided that the most effective and affordable way to respond to homelessness is to house people.
Yeah.
In apartments with no strings attached. They offered people support with job placement, with medical support, gave them what they needed to start to thrive again and sort of get back on their feet. There wasn't a timeline for when they needed, this was years ago that I read this, but I believe there wasn't a timeline for when they needed to get out, move out of the housing.
Good.
But so many people did move out. After a short period of time, whatever that looks like, because they had that stability.
Yes.
So I'd like to learn more about programs like this and see where else this kind of thing might be happening.
Yeah.
I know that there are some places sort of around us that have been focused on homelessness amongst like veteran populations and ending that in particular. But I'd be interested to see what else people are, like municipalities, like what local governments are doing that's more positive than just these sweeps.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my last job, I think we did some work and volunteering work with an organization that was doing work to support homeless veterans in D.C., right? And so those programs, I think, have a high effective rate, right? The other thing that made me think of is I just saw a random TikTok, so I can't give anybody credit for this, but the idea in the TikTok was, think about, what we just went through in the pandemic, and how we had to, quickly pivot, and everyone was working from home. Lots of folks were working from home. And so, our businesses, our corporations, right, our schools, were vacant, right, for all those years, right? What if we were to use some of those spaces where businesses have gone fully remote, right, as additional options for housing for unhoused people? And I just thought, my goodness, look at that, right? There's lots of companies out there that have gone fully remote, right, or only have folks, don't need all of the space that they used to have, perhaps, right? And so there are solutions out there. There are possibilities out there, right, if we just are willing to see it, to talk about it, to strategize about it, and to just do it. I think that's great. Figuring out what other resources are out there, what other programs exist. I'd love to do that too.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, there's so many empty apartments across the country. There's so much empty housing that could be used for other purposes.
Yeah.
So definitely.
I love it. Well, my friend, you're up next time in our next episode. What have you decided to bring to the table? You know you have to do that, right?
I remembered.
Okay, good.
Vaguely. So I'm going to bring a publication called, from Interrupting Criminalization, called The Struggle Continues, which was written by Andrea Ritchie and published back in February of this year. And it's all about how organizing around defund the police is continuing throughout the country. So I pulled this whole introduction from the introduction page in the document to give us some insight into what we're diving into.
Okay.
So it says, quote, "Over the past 2 years, organizers across the continent continued to actively fight for and build safer communities, contrary to repeated assertions that movements to divest from policing and invest in communities are dead. If something is indeed dead, there should be no need to repeatedly proclaim it so. Indeed, the fact that politicians, pundits, and academics continued to feel compelled to respond to, address, and refute the demand to defund police is a sign of power, not weakness, and of the clarity of vision it communicates. Stop investing in institutions that are perpetuating harm while consuming an ever-growing share of our collective resources. Start investing in people, programs, and institutions that promote community safety and well-being."
Wow.
Yeah, so that's just the introduction.
Right.
And so, I'm looking forward to diving into this and talking about it right here. It looks like it goes into a lot of different projects and things that people are doing across the continent to sort of create new systems and new ways of being and existing and being in community with one another.
I love that. I mean, and talk about a direct connection to what we just talked about today, right? Like you said, start investing in people, programs, and institutions that, promote community safety and well-being, right? Like this idea of unhoused folks, right? And what we can be doing to end homelessness is a connection there too, right? So that sounds really exciting. I know we love our friends over at Interrupting Criminalization. They produce such incredible work.
Yes.
So I'm very much so looking forward to that. I think you mentioned it was a PDF document.
Yeah. It's on their Interrupting Criminalization website. It's called The Struggle Continues. So if you type that into your favorite search engine, you can find it.
Your favorite search engine. I love it. Good. All right. I'm looking forward to it. With that, we want to thank you for joining us today and for listening to Interdependent Study. You know what I'm going to ask you to do, but it's been a minute, so you may have forgotten. Please follow us, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life, follow us on the socials, check us out on YouTube, sign up for our email list to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you so much for listening, and remember, it's not about us, but it is about us, and we'll talk to you next week.